Hello and welcome to the podcast. Back to the podcast, Dr. Marion. Oh my God, I just realized I haven't done a podcast interview in a very long time and I felt like a joke. But welcome to the podcast, Dr. Marion. It's the first interview of 2023.
Oh, thanks for having me. And it is great to be back and always a pleasure to chat with you because no doubt we're going to end up down some fun little rabbit hole.
They always end out somewhere good. But I think we're just chatting offline and maybe I'll get you to introduce yourself and a bit of what you do. But I think we're just going to approach this as what we do on a daily basis. It feels ever since I think we connected 2021, 2021.
Yes.
And then we're emotional support for each other through COVID in Melbourne lockdowns. And it felt like we had wines over like voice messages and Instagram dancing, sending videos to each other. Anyway, but often get into these really real, which I appreciate most about our friendship, is these conversations that are really raw and potent and vulnerable. And so I would love to share that today, and we'll jump into a topic. But before we do that, how about you kick off with a fabulous introduction?
I'd love to. So for those who don't know me, I'm Dr. Marion Piper. I am a creativity coach, a writer, and a speaker, currently based in Melbourne, but have been doing a bit of a digital nomad adventure the last 6 months. And typically I work with a lot of multi-passionate people, creative entrepreneurs, and career creatives. So it's a bit of a pastiche, but I think the thing that a lot of people I work with have in common is the fact that they are multi-passionate and they really struggle to find that one thing. And I'm kind of here to say it's okay to be interested in so many things. And in fact, that's your superpower. So that's really what I try to promote because the world, is, I think, intent on having us try and chase this, elusive one thing. But actually, because we're such multidimensional people, of course, we're naturally going to be attracted to a bunch of different things. So then the conversation that I have with people usually revolves around, well, how do I bring all the loves of my life together in a way that is sustainable for me? And this is where I really lean on my PhD research around creativity and post-traumatic growth. And you may have listened to the episode that Kay and I did back in September 2021 around how to glow up your business. And yeah, it's been a process for me of accepting that is who I am, and really trying to fight for what I believe in and advocate for creativity, not just as a form of artistry, but really as a healing modality. Especially in these times, and I use the inverted commas for these times.
Yeah, I mean, thank you, and love your work and love your commitment to not only the end result but the process. I think you show that really well on your Instagram and in our conversations, and the way that you present yourself. It's not like a polished finished product. It's like a process, and it's a constant creating and recreating, which I think is really inspiring. But can also get exhausting to be in that space because, I think as a lot of creatives, and it's interesting as you were talking, then I think it might have been in the book 4,000 Weeks that I read last year, and talking about the schooling system, and it comes up a lot for me because I love that topic. But that I think I'm so like I am I do lots of different things, but I can be very black and white and like, here's the start, here's the finish, I'll race you, like, and I get to the point quicker or I'm gonna lose interest, like that kind of way of being. But in saying that, the way you just described that made me think of the schooling system being so uniformed and one directional and one pathway. And just made me question. Then I was like, is a lot of my black and whiteness because of that as well, when that it's good to be able to do a bit more of a variety, or to zoom out and go, what direction am I being pulled in next, rather than being like, no, this is how I've always done things.
Yeah, it is hard. And I think how we're raised, what we're taught, and the systems around those things often dictate where we end up. And I think that's why at the moment we're seeing this big push about, or this larger conversation around habits and process, as opposed to the destination and the outcome. And so, and that's where I think creativity can be such a useful concept, as a just as a concept, not necessarily as a practice, because what it is it's expansive. It's not designed like the schooling system to prepare us for work, because that's, I think, what we forget. And there's a lot of people who speak about this much more eloquently than I do, and you know, and I'm saying this from a position of someone who adored school. You know, I went right through and did a PhD, so that should give you an indication that I do believe in the system and the value of it. But often the delivery, the how we do things is overlooked because we're sold on the destination. And this is something that I'm starting to understand a little bit in more depth now, especially as I take a much more critical eye to the things that I'm consuming, particularly in the online space. You know, a lot of these, like people, you see people talk about online courses and they're selling you the transformation, but they're not actually selling you the how. You know, they say you're going to go from this to this, but what about the gap in the middle? What does that feel like? How do I manage that? What happens when I want to quit? What happens when I have success and I've never had success before and I don't know how to manage it, you know? So there's a huge chunk of life that we just bypass because we're not taught how to sit in the emotion of the process, how to sit in the experience, but equally how not to repress our natural reaction, right? And
it's not even just sitting in it, it's experiencing it. It's got no value. It doesn't have, the value is not that it does have value. The common lie that we're sold is that the process isn't the valuable part, the end goal is the valuable part. And it's so interesting. I think I might have even shared this article with you, and I need to go and find it and reread it. But I think I sent you one a while back about selling the future. And it's exactly that. We're so conditioned into wanting more, or being something that we're not, or improving, or, you know, comparing. And that it's, we're looking, and it's like, how many times have we heard people and witnessed people's lives who gain what someone might consider success and not be happy there, you know? And you see it a lot, and it's not only is it not happy, but it can also take lives in, you know, addiction and abuse and burnout and things like that. So I think that's a really important part of the whoa, that was a big truck just beep so loudly. Wow, that was scary. But talking about the process and valuing, giving that value, I think I'm really interested to dive into, so as the black and white thinker and you're the creative thinker, what is this value of creativity and process in a world where, I mean, we've been through a lot, you know? And I think even when I was writing it down, I was like, it's been COVID, and there was a war in Russia, and now we're in this economic situation, and, you know, the cost of living and all these things. And I was like, part of me was like, that's life, you know. That's what happened. You never just like, okay, we're just gonna have a break where there's not a major thing. Also, you could argue, like, if you don't watch the news, are any of those things happening? But, you know, these things happening. What role does creativity, how do you justify creativity? How do you make room for it? How do you carve it out? What role does it need to play, especially in times of what a lot of people would consider stress, uncertainty, scarcity, you know, fear? At the moment, it feels like there's a very big collective, you know, burden on people about what is happening in the world, and how does that impact, you know, our ability, our financial security.
Absolutely. So I think this is a bit of a multi-layered experience and response here, right? I think when we are in really challenging times, and we are in fight or flight and we're stressed out, our vision, and I use vision not necessarily just as looking, but our ability to take things in narrows. So what creativity creativity gives us the ability to zoom out. And I think what happens when our focus is narrow is that we forget about the bigger picture. We forget about the fact that this moment in time is a blip on the larger experience of what it is to be a human, and to be a human who is alive. Lockdown was 2 to 3 years of our, say, 80 to 85 years. It's a very small percentage of the overall whole. And so if we can develop the ability to pause, first of all, and catch ourselves in these cycles of scarcity, in these cycles of stress, which is not easy. It is not easy. That's why I sort of say that everything is a practice. And the first thing you have to do is recognize, what you're experiencing, what emotion is coming up for you. And there are various different ways that you can do that, and lots of different support that you can tap into to help you do that. But if you can recognize that you are experiencing this emotion, and you have a tool or a method to pull yourself out of that for a moment, just long enough to recognize that it's going on and to look at the big picture, it does something to you. It allows you to expand. And when you put yourself, this is where particularly the act of creating, of making something, it takes you out of that experience of stress. It puts your attention into something that's different in front of you, and it pulls you out of your head. And that's the goal, right? Is we've got to get out of our own head and into our bodies.
Oh, this is good. I think we can go like a step backwards and then a step forwards, because I want to go back, and because you are a doctor, Marion Piper, you're qualified for me to really grill you on this stuff. And I want to go back to really pinpointing those emotions of fear, scarcity, and how do we identify them and pull ourselves out of them. Then what practices we can do, which I know you are an expert in, using it as alchemizing the pain and the fear and stuff into ideas and creativity. But then I also want to to see what that looks like in terms of sustaining it and staying out of it as well. I think would be awesome. But let's this idea, so in this moment of I think also the benefits of creativity, I think, is like the self-expression and all of those things. But let's start at the beginning, because I think this could be a really useful therapy session for people. And I think we both chatted earlier before, January can be a really quiet month. If you work for yourself, it can be really scary. It can activate a lot of fear, let alone sitting in the unknown of how your year is going to play out, but also coming off the back of the expensive December economic stuff, all those things, right? And so I think it's a really real experience for a lot of people, myself included, that it's like it comes around every time of year where you're like, is our things going to work out, and so it's also not easy to catch, I think, unless you've got a good practice and you've got people around you and all those, even if you do have all those things, it's bloody hard, because the stories we tell ourselves in our heads, and they can get really loud and really dark, and they can also get really blurred as to where they're coming from. Is it my self-belief? Is it that I gone into a past pattern that I learned from my parent, or is this the way that I think society sees me, or all those. But how do you really, if you really try and pinpoint it, what would be some tools or resources or doctor advice as to how to really start to find those emotions before they get the better of you? Because I think both reasoning for this is that, and maybe you can help to identify words of what they might feel like in the body, because I know that if we don't catch them, then we run the risk of people giving up on their creativity, and we lose really great artists and creators and open thinking creative minds, like in so many ways, that go and might exit this space, and maybe I think it will always eventually find themselves back. But in times of uncertainty and stress, how do we help our creatives through this without losing them to feeling like they need to revert back to safety of you know, a job or something that's not serving them or stuck
Yeah,
with it.
this is such a huge issue. So I'm going to do my best to answer it with the information that I have. And I also want to preface this by saying that I'm not a psychologist. I've done a PhD. I've researched this from a research perspective and from a practical perspective. But first and foremost, you got to understand that no matter what anybody else tells you, whatever ever conversations that you see online or with people around you, is that you're human. And as human beings, we have emotions, and emotions are natural, whatever they are. Anger, fear, resentment, being afraid, feeling blocked, all of this stuff is a normal reaction to a very abnormal world. And this is something that Dr. Gabor Mate goes into in great depth in his book, The Myth of Normal, which I haven't read, but I've listened to a number of podcasts lately where he started to talk about and bring this to light. What we consider normal is actually not normal at all. So understand that you are an organic creature and being existing in a situation that more often than not is not designed to help you be healthy and natural. So already we are in a situation that isn't designed for our well-being. So you know, a lot of the time it's not your fault that you are reacting the way that you are reacting. There are systems in the world that you are reacting to. So first and foremost, there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with the way that you're reacting. So I want to start from that place of understanding that you are doing the best that you can with the information and the tools that you have available to yourself here and now, you know. So
I really love that. I think it's yeah, just quickly I want to add to is like this feeling, and it just clicked for me too, is like, you know, I think with a stress response for me can actually be like control, like, you know, let's get under more control. And it's something that you said to earlier about suppressing these feelings. And I think the permission to say feel, because, you know, we're sold this, like, especially as women, I think, you know, sit down and be quiet and, you know, and look pretty and, you know, don't make a fuss, you know, and rather than like, I'm feeling all the feels, which is really beautiful. I felt an ease in my entire body when you gave that permission, because it was like, oh, that's such a simple thing, but it's like, yes, these are really real. I don't need to control them. I don't need to put them in a box and keep them to the side.
No, and if what you do not express, you end up repressing, and what you repress can cause way much more damage inside of you than probably any expression could outside of you. So first and foremost, your job is to feel what you're experiencing. And you do not have to share that on social media. That does not have to become a part of your content plan or your brand. You can just express things as they come up, right? And I think there's in the research that I've come across, a lot of people say that it takes about 90 seconds for an emotion to pass through you. So one of the first tools that I do when I feel in my body, the way that if I know I'm having a strong emotional reaction, if my breath quickens and my heart rate quickens, my breath goes really shallow. So I breathe up here, I breathe up in my head and in my throat, not down in my belly. So one of the first things I'll do when I feel that tense, so you kind of feel like your body just you become a little bit on edge. Maybe you might be a little bit more sensitive to sound or to light. So your emotions, your senses will kind of heighten a little bit. When I notice this happening, and it's feeling really overwhelming, I just stop. Whatever I'm doing, I stop. I put my phone down, I shut my computer screen, I will walk away, I will get up and move from where I am. And I'll give myself about 90 seconds to 2 minutes to just feel what's happening. More often than not, I'd probably say like 7 out of 10 times, that's enough. And I take a few deep breaths and I'm like, okay, all right, that's okay. Like something happened, I was processing something, that's fine. But then every now and then it won't stop. And I think this is when the fight or flight then starts to kick in, and we become more reactionary than responsive. And so it's in those moments that I know, okay, there's something serious happening here. And then I'll tend to sit with it a little bit longer. My natural response, this is something I've done since I could pick up a pen, is to write it down and to write it out. Because again, if we do not if we do not express what the feeling that's trying to get through us, it will become repressed. And so your job at that point, once you've recognized something's happening, is to get it out, however you want to get it out. For some people, it's dance it out. For some people, it's talk it out. You might be someone who needs to shout it out or scream it out, stomp it out, swim it out, go to the gym and, hit a punching bag, whatever you need to do. Oftentimes it's something very physical. So, because again, emotions are energy in motion, and the way to get energy out is to move your body. So that is probably where I'd say to start.
Yeah,
especially if it feels like an overwhelming experience. For things that are more chronic, that might require a little bit more investigation on your behalf, with the support of, say, your GP, a therapist, or even a coach, or a yoga class, or something where you don't have to be the one to directly drive the investigation. So one of the tips that I always give to my creativity coaching clients who say that they don't know what to create next, or they're like, I'm blocked, I don't know what to do, the very first thing I tell them to do is to go and take a class, go and take instruction, because sometimes we just need to hand over that to somebody else and allow ourselves just to be taken along on a process. It might be because maybe we're identifying too much with what we're creating, so we can't actually extricate ourselves enough, gain enough distance to be able to walk ourselves through that process. So it's perfectly normal and perfectly fine, and I'd encourage you to just take a class, even if it's like a YouTube class for 20 minutes, right? And I think that applies to pretty much anything as well.
I love that. It's striking, coming off the back of that myth of normal, Gabor Mate's work, is you saying, which I think is something, coming into February and having, so much going on, it's being like, okay, I feel behind already. And it's when you're like, oh, I'm having an emotion. So I put my phone down and I closed my laptop. I was like, I had a physical response, and being like, that's a really normal thing to do. If you're in a stress situation, but it just made me realize, how many times I'd be like suppressed, and I don't just go, hang on, this is a lot. And the other thing that stood out was that, you pick up a pen straight away, and I'm noticing the suppression that's like, no, sit at the computer longer and you can fix it for working. But that's also suppressing the emotion. So then I don't sleep well, because my unconscious, I'm also, if I get up from my computer, sometimes I go sit in the sun on my roof, and but I'll put a podcast in and learn, and it's like, okay, well, I'll just keep like adding learning and stuff. And and then eventually I reckon I probably average like, third or fourth day of distraction and noise to really just like drown it out, that I will punch my pillow, I will sob for uncontrollably, I will journal, and then you kind of surrender to, and then get to that point where I'm like, oh God, why didn't I do that days ago? Because I'm also exhausted by this point, because all my energy is going to pushing things down, and by working harder and then not sleeping, and then I don't look after myself, and I just drink black coffee, and then and I'm exhausted,
Yeah, absolutely. And I there's two things I'd say, is that I think that story of just sit at the computer and do more, that is not your story that's coming in. That is one that you've learned and inherited from somewhere, probably just from living in late stage capitalism. But the other thing is that emotional reaction that I spoke about earlier, where you feel that tense and you feel that, your vision kind of, your focus narrowing. For me, that's an indication that my cup is full. Like, my cup is full. And what do you do to a full cup? You don't keep pouring water into it, right? You got to pour it out. So that to me is an indication.
Dump more in.
Yeah, just keep filling it up.
Yeah.
And the answer is no. Do not go and get a bigger cup. That is not how this works. You know, you tip a little bit out, and I think that's why I think this practice of you know, coming back to yourself and checking in with your emotions and checking in with your body, which is what mindfulness is built on. It gives you just long enough to tip a little bit out of your cup. You're not trying to empty the whole thing, you know, and this is why you see people who are you know, really high achievers, you know, that working, that they end up burning out. It's because they haven't figured out for them how to just tip a little bit out. We don't want to empty the whole thing, because then we'll panic, because we'll be depleted, but for a different reason. So it's about finding that sweet spot for yourself where, you know, you're taking in enough to inspire you, but you're also giving enough in output that it energizes you, because it's in the output, it is in the creation that we re-energize ourselves. It's not in the doing nothing, you know, it's not in that doing part.
I love that. And it reminds me, and I know we'll get into this because I think you teach this really well, but it reminds me of when I first got into a morning routine. And it was, I used to think that I needed a morning routine for years. I think, I don't know, I've shared it before, but I was like, I know that meditation is good for me. You know, like coming from a Catholic upbringing where we, you know, prayer on a regular basis was soothing, you know, and so I knew that the sitting in silence was a good thing for me. Had it in my diary for years, like 2 years, I think, as a reoccurring. On Fridays, I'm going to go to meditation class. It was 10 minutes down the road. Never did it. And then once I finally carved it out, because I read Joe Dispenza's work and I had meaning and purpose to it. But the analogy that you just used of pouring out a little bit of the cup, and not the whole thing, because I think that's what I used to think, that if I meditate or I have a morning routine, then I still want to be productive, Kate, you know, like it's like, it was almost like this vision of like spiritual hippie versus, you know, successful entrepreneur, and they couldn't coexist. Whereas like that little bit of, instead of getting up and getting straight to my desk at 6 a.m. to try and fix it, I get up and I meditate at 6 a.m. And that's for me, as that. And I think it's for our overachievers and perfectionists and, you know, people in a living stress response that they might be suppressing right now. Often the thing of pouring out something feels like you're clinging to it so tightly, like I could not possibly, you know, or shutting the laptop or the phone and going, I need to go and feel this, but you're clinging to it. I know the feeling of being like, no way, don't tell me to stop, I've got to keep going, is actually the best thing to create some expressive or reflective routine.
Absolutely. And I think you've identified something that has been missing from the conversation around creativity, and specifically in relationship to productivity and work, is that there is the creative process itself, as it is known in the literature, is typically like a 5-stage process, right? Nowhere in that process, because it's represented in a linear fashion, goes from, you know, having the idea, getting ready for the idea, making the idea, and sharing the idea. Nowhere in that process is rest mentioned, or recovery, or recuperation.
Or change the idea 10 billion times.
Yeah. Or flip-flop around for 5 years because you just haven't had the confidence to pull the trigger. Not looking at anybody, hashtag looks in the mirror. But, you know, and this is the other thing too, like I've been thinking a lot about consistency in this whole conversation, especially as it pertains to this idea of like, how do we find certainty in uncertain times? And so having things that for you give you consistency. And what I mean by the word consistency is having, and this relates to your morning routine, right? When we do something consistently, it doesn't mean that we do it every day. It means that we have the same process for it every single time that we do it, right? So it's, again, coming back to what we were talking about at the start about how important it is to refine that process and to have that process be something that allows you to tip a little bit out of the cup at the same time that it pours a little bit back in, right? So there's that beautiful weighted balance between giving and taking in this process. And this is one of the things that I'm on a bit of a bugbear at the moment, is people that are saying, people expect consistency. We expect things to be a certain way, which I think is a huge myth. Yes, we can train people to expect things from us, but at the end of the day, everyone is so absorbed in their own little side of the universe, they actually don't know whether or not you're being consistent. Yet we are fed this story that in order to succeed, we must be consistent. But it's consistent in terms of always being on, rather than consistent as in, how do you do things in a way that is completely sustainable? Sustainable meaning I could do this forever without interruption, because it's like a self-feeding process. So this is what I'm interested in, is how can we build a creative life that allows us to tip from the cup, pour back into the cup, tip from the cup, pour back into the cup, in a way that allows us to feed any goal, any idea, any dream, any vision into that, and it spits it out at the other end, and we just keep going, because we've built in practices that allow us to stop, practices that allow us to rest, but also practices that allow us to accelerate when we have the energy. Because that's the thing, right? Like, oftentimes energy is quite unpredictable. And there's been stretches of time where I haven't been able to do anything for like 2 weeks. And then all of a sudden, for 3 days, I get everything done that I would have done half-assed in those 3 weeks in 3 days. So again, because I followed and this is what I figured out, it's because I created a process that was really tight and that had really specific steps. And it was like a no-brainer. It's like, oh, of course, that is how I would create an email newsletter. This step, this step, this step, this step. And then I just rinse and repeat that, right? And this is the other thing too. Certainty and consistency are boring as fuck. A lot of the things that you need to sustain you are really boring and really lame, but yet there's this part of us that thinks, oh, like, I'm going to be an entrepreneur and it's going to be exciting and big lights, and I'm going to be on the stage, and yeah, sure, there are moments like that, but more often than not, it's really boring and mundane. And this is why we have to get used to finding joy and meaning in those routines, like your morning routine, and having the I guess the gall or the courage to create one that is specific for ourselves, and not just picking and choosing and copying what other people are doing. But again, it comes back to that, how well do you know yourself? This is the question it always comes back to.
Oh, I love that so much. And I love the idea of a routine being, it's almost like I know I need to stop. And so for you, it's shutting the computer and walking away. For me, it's getting up and meditating or sitting in the sunshine or swimming, like it's a consistency in knowing that I've got the skills to A, identify, and B, feel it and experience it. And it actually just made me think about the word consistency. Consistency for me is like it's a routine. So it's like and it used to be like, no, I do this, 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 and this, but now it's like I have time to myself first thing in the morning. That's the perimeter. That's all it is. It's time for myself to ground and start my day with intention. But that is become, and I worked hard at building that it's just a non-negotiable, and it's not even a chore or anything, but I definitely was disciplined to meditate at the beginning. But it makes me think of like the brain and how much it craves patterns and certainty. So consistency is a routine. A routine is a well-born habit. A habit is a pattern, and a pattern is a known neuro pathway that your brain has programmed for safety to create. When we have routines and patterns and consistency in our life, which is so interesting to think. This conversation started with having stress responses to uncertainty and getting to the pattern, which is a sign of safety, because your brain is on autopilot of the brain and the human body is most comfortable in well-worn pathways, because it's what we know and it's predictable and we can do it. So it's how cool. That's good. That was a great little.
I love how you broke that down too, and it also explains why it's so difficult for us to, one, change, especially if your neural pathways, if your habits and patterns were wired when you were younger around trauma. So if you have someone who has experienced, childhood trauma, or even lockdown trauma, um, because it changes your behaviors, because you have to respond differently to what's going on. And you have, if you're doing that over time, particularly we were in lockdown in Melbourne for like 2 years, right? It's going to take some time for those patterns to undo. So what we're seeing right now, I think, is the first processing of lockdown that's happened, because people are realizing, actually, I don't want to feel like this. I know the world is chaotic, and I know that there's so many things are going on, but actually I never used to react like this. And why am I reacting like this? Again, this is why I say it's not your fault. It's not your fault that you are reacting the way that you are reacting. But I'm glad you mentioned this idea too of safety, because in order to express ourselves, we have to feel safe. Our nervous system has to be, quiet enough in order for us to feel comfortable enough to listen to ourselves. And so if you are waiting for the world to give you that certainty and that safety, you are going to be waiting the rest of your life, because it just ain't coming. Because the world is not this set certain thing. Nature is, while it does have patterns and rhythms and seasons, people are chaotic, people are unpredictable, people are uncertain. And that is the world. When we say the world, I think that's ultimately what we're referring to, is everybody else, right? So this is why it's so important to take the time to experiment, to play, to figure out the things that help you feel safe. And for you, it is meditating, it's having that time in the morning that's just for you. And I guarantee you, most of the things that make us feel safer, they don't cost anything. It's being in nature. It's, being around people who love and support you and care for you and give you support and allow you to be yourself, right? So self-expression in itself, I think, is one of the things that allows me to feel really safe. And the practice that I've discovered over time that has facilitated that is journaling, which is why I bang on about it so much. But it's not impossible to change. But the thing is, those neural pathways and those patterns and those behaviors that we have had, especially if you are someone who's been through trauma in the past, there's always going to be a memory of that within our brains, because we carry in everything every experience we have imprints on us. And so this is why we're talking about this, and talking about how you can catch yourself, because the key to the change, or at least making room for the change, is catching the pattern when it happens, and then consciously and intentionally overriding it and choosing a different path, which I think a lot of people forget that they have the agency to do that. But you do have the agency to do that, but it just takes a little bit more effort and attention.
And I think I really want to get into that as our next step, because I think that's where your expertise are particularly glowing in. How do people do that in a regular basis? And I just want to quickly touch on that topic of lockdown trauma, because it's something that I have really been sitting with, especially the last few weeks. And I think, at the end of last year was, chaotic, and, end of the year was busy. Last year and in general was a shit show. But, this last few weeks, I've actually been really sitting with you and I were both, I think in the middle of winter, lockdown, solo, Melbourne, living solo, and, did our best to support each other. But it was really hard a lot of the time. And I think something that I've really noticed in myself is that I have lockdown habits that haven't lifted, which is, I can spend a really busy weekend with my partner and catch up with a friend. And, but then I do this thing where a few nights a week I'll sit at home or like a few days even, where I don't leave my apartment. And I'm like, and maybe because I started watching World's Toughest Prisons, where I'm like, I've noticed the other day, and I said to my partner, I was like, I think I need to go back to therapy because I didn't leave my apartment 2 days, and it was like I couldn't. It was this, it, yeah, it's like I was so comfortable not leaving because, yeah, I was like, I can
Because it's
exist without,
safe, and
yeah,
it's safe. The home
and
is
I don't,
safe.
yeah. And yeah, and I think it was that thing of being like, it was so painful to not leave the house during lockdown. And then it got comfortable. And it's like, yeah, you kind of expand to the house and be like, oh, this will do. And really realizing, yeah, I need to probably get I had an office before lockdown. I did in-person coaching sessions. I went to networking events. I spoke in real life at networking, at, speaking gigs. So yeah, and I think it's really important. And I think to bring this into context is that I was doing it and I've only just been able to notice it and to actually give it this exact expression, to say, oh, I don't think that's a healthy behavior and you need to, and now going, I've only to the last 2 weeks have now gone, okay, I'm ready to change this. Like I'm ready to rewire this. This has become normal for me, and it's a really unhealthy way to live. I'm not interacting with people in real life, and other than my girlfriend and like set events, I don't have my own hobbies. But I think what I'm doing is I'm catching that now, and like, I put my running shoes out the other day and I was like, okay, we're going for a walk and we're doing this thing, and so, or sometimes it's literally walking out of the house and being like, yeah, like feeling really anxious, but it's like, just leave the house, and I walk around and check everything all the time, be like, no, I've forgotten something. And it's like, but it's like this pacing around the house because the next thing to do is to leave and I'm procrastinating. But starting to catch those things and say, just walk out the front door, you've done everything. And like literally have to say that to myself in my head. But I think where this could lead into your expertise is, yeah, I've noticed it and I've caught it, and now I'm doing those little tiny wins where I can say to myself, and I think I probably learned this from you, of really catching good wins, little wins, and fanning them and saying, yeah, okay, like you're not going to be the weirdo that's stuck in their house forever. Here's where you left the house. Here's where you said, notice that you needed to do something different, and you did it, even if it was just going for a walk.
Yeah, so there's a few things here, and I know I believe we did talk about it very, very briefly in our first podcast chat, but I want to bring people's attention to the concept of rumination, and ruminative thinking. And so these are the thought loops that we get stuck on, because rumination essentially means that it's just like you're just thinking the same thing over and over and over and over and over again, and that's, I think, is what prevents us from catching ourselves, is that these thought loops happen because your brain is trying to make sense of what's going on while it's happening, that's what makes it so confusing. And I think people, at least what I've observed and what I've read in the research, typically rumination can, especially if you're recovering from a trauma, can kind of go one of two ways. There's two types of ruminative thinking. The first is intrusive rumination, and that is the repeated focus on the negative thoughts. And then we have deliberate rumination, which is the process of focusing on the experience from multiple angles, and intentionally looking at it, and dissecting it and going, okay, well, how does this make me feel, both positively and negatively? How do I want to feel? What happened? What did I do next? And so this is where, again, journaling is a really useful tool, and therapy as well. Journaling and therapy, I'd say like very, very similar in process, because therapy, you are having a dialogue with a therapist who's helping you deliberately ruminate on what's going on. Journaling gives you an opportunity to be both the therapist and the patient, but on paper. And this is the cathartic aspect of journaling, and it's an incredibly creative process. Both of them are. And so, instead of giving into the ruminative thought, and instead of following down the same track and getting frustrated again, what if next time you took that thought and you just wrote it down, and then started to actually think about it from a few different perspectives, start to pick it apart a little bit, be really curious around what is happening. And if we use your staying at home as an example, it's like, well, okay, why do I stay at home? It's comfortable, it's safe. You know, no one's around. I don't have to be on, you know, and, you know, the negative sides. It means that I'm not out getting fresh air. It means that I'm not engaging with friends. It means that I'm not enjoying my city, you know. And so what it does is it allows you to build a bit of a bigger picture around your behavior or your reaction, you know, because I think it's a perfectly normal reaction to going through a pandemic, is to continue that behavior until that behavior gets to a certain point where it becomes destructive or it becomes noticeably antithesis to weird, or just, you know, it's not what you want to do anymore, right? It can be as simple as that. You might just be like, actually, you know what, I don't want to drink anymore. Actually, I don't want to eat meat anymore. Actually, I don't want to hang out with this group of people anymore. That is you catching yourself in a moment where your needs have changed, right? So this is what all this stuff is about. What do I need right now? You know, maybe right now I do need to stay home, but maybe right now what I need is to be around people. And allowing yourself that really uncomfortable luxury of changing your mind, of being like, you know what, actually, I'm a different person now than I was a year ago. So this person is going to need different things. What do they need? You know? So I don't think all of this stuff that we're talking about, I really want to pull people away from this binary of yes or no, day or night, lockdown, no lockdown, right? All these things exist together. We are constantly having to hold so many competing ideas, emotions, experiences, you know, and it's why, you know, it's what makes relationships so wonderful and so complicated, right? And especially the relationship we have with ourselves, because we constantly our first and biggest critic, because we see everything that we do, right? And so that in itself is going to fill up your cup really quickly every day, because you're like, oh, I said I was going to go for a walk and I didn't. Why didn't I do that? Oh, I'm such a failure, blah, 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 you know? So it's really important to focus on the thoughts and what's happening in your head and in your heart, and to reconcile the two. And particularly if you do want to change, if you do want to make those small tweaks, you know, it takes time. You know, all this stuff takes time.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that really good way to round back to this building and this regular, you know, practice of journaling and self-reflection, and some of the things that you teach of creativity, because, you know, I think starting off this conversation with, you know, what role does creativity play in times of, you know, stress and uncertainty? It's the first thing to go out the window when we are stressed and there is uncertainty, because we try to, you know, cling to safety and patterns. And, you know, there's good ones that we can put in there to create that sense of safety, which lowers the nervous system and then allows room for creativity and process. But I know that you talk a lot about using not only like, yeah, having a stressed experience, and, you know, we've talked a lot about when they come up. And I think what you said just now is really important, to say that this is something we've got to be ready for all the time, you know, because it's life, it's high emotive, but anything could happen. And so how do we create ourselves, you know, prime ourselves to be able to process, to experience, to not make it bad, but to lean into it and explore it and to alchemize it. And I'd really love for you to talk about that, because I know that you're really passionate about using creativity and art and our pain and our traumas and our experiences that we might want to put away in a little box and not tell anyone about. And you ooze this in everything that you do, because it's authentic. I consider you so deeply authentically yourself, which is refreshing, and why we connect, because I can't handle much more anyone that's not, you know, it's like the first thing I want to call out on people. But yeah, but I think it's because you live this and you've developed this practice through your studies and your research, but also how you live your life.
Yeah, oh man, transmutation is a fantastic word to describe this process. It's where we take something and we turn it into something else. And all the creatives, the artists who are listening will know this process, because it's what you do day in and day out, when you take your clients' ideas and you turn them into a website, or you turn them into a blog, or you turn them into a social media campaign. That transmutation process of taking something and turning it into something else can also apply to our difficult life circumstances. And I always use the example of Frida Kahlo. She was like the master of this, right? She was in a terrible accident when she was younger, which basically kept her bedbound for years. And, she could have just sat there and did nothing, but there was a part of her that was trying to make sense of what had happened to her, and trying to understand why this happened. Because if we can make something meaningful, it gives us fuel, it gives us energy, it gives us the strength we need to keep going, because otherwise it's so easy to give up. If you don't have a practice of being able to find your own reason why, of course, like, it's so easy to just go along with what's happening in life. And there's this quote that says, only dead fish go with the flow, which I kind of love. So all the other fish, the alive ones, they move with the flow. They don't let it carry them, but they harness it in order to go where they want to go. And so this process of taking our pain and alchemizing it, I think first begins with actually accepting. There's a level of acceptance that needs to happen, of not so much why did this happen to me, but this thing happened to me, and what next? What am I gonna do next? What am I gonna do with this? And I use the example, I spoke at No BS conference last October. I used the example of what happened when the sister that I never met passed away, and I was faced with this dilemma of having this huge amount of grief for this person who was very similar to me from all accounts, but I'd never known. So I had to reconcile these two things that didn't make sense. And oftentimes that's what pain does, is that it cuts right through meaning, and it fractures meaning. It fractures your worldview, because you're like, wait, beforehand, this is what a sister was meant to be, and now, like, this is what I'm dealing with, and it doesn't make sense. So transmuting our pain gives us the agency to decide what something means. And when we are given that agency, when we have that agency, we feel empowered, and it allows us to actually not be the victim of our circumstance, but to actually use that experience as something helpful, right? And so what I did was as part of a research project, I interviewed a group of 35 women for stories of their childhood sibling relationships, of their sister relationships. And I took those stories and I created a narrative of all the things that me and my sister could have shared but didn't, in order to give myself what I didn't need. And that's what, so pain robs us of our ability to soothe ourselves, but then to also give ourselves what we need. And this is where I think creativity is incredibly powerful, because it puts you in that driver's seat, and it gives you the agency that you need to not become the victim, because it reminds you that actually experience is a raw material. And if I like to think of it, or refer to it as the chef who's trying to cook a meal. They don't necessarily I mean, they have an idea of how they want the meal to look and to taste, and but then they have a recipe. They have a step-by-step recipe, but then the quality of the meal is determined by the quality of the ingredients. So that's why the best restaurants often have the most beautiful ingredients. And so I see pain as a very incredibly high quality, beautiful ingredient. I know that sounds really counterintuitive, but because it's so volatile and it's so specific to you, and it's fire. Pain for me is fire, and you don't tame fire, you learn how to work with it.
I love when you called it a raw material, because as you were talking about, and I know we've talked a lot about alchemy and transmuting, and reminds me of the book The Alchemist, but I've read lots of books on searching for the elixir of life, and a lot of like those, how many books, the Holy Grail, the Philosopher's Stone, the Alchemist, like there's so many books about people on their search for meaning. And when you called it a raw material, you know, there's heaps of those kind of books that are talking about, you know, how do we make this elixir that's going to make me live forever, you know, and everyone on this search, and it needs raw materials, you know. And I think turning, you know, melting gold and like all that, you still needs materials. And I think, yeah, it's really, I love it because you that also mentioned that you need it as an ingredient because it's the raw material that we're going to alchemize. But then it's the fracturing of the story. So it's like everything we were talking about earlier is these stories that we tell ourselves. If we inquire into the pain, then we fracture the story, and we question it, and we go, oh, and you know, even back to the very beginning of this conversation, is this a story? You know, I've been living like this, and I was so convinced of the story. This pain has fractured the story, and now I'm seeing differently. And the story I was telling myself was actually what I thought to be true, but wasn't. You know, and like maybe it's I'm this kind of artist, or you know, this kind of thing, and then yeah, it creates that rawness, I think.
And it also, the pain gives us perspective. That's what you're mentioning there. It gives us an opportunity to step back, because you actually don't get,
It's
you
like
don't
a
choose
fast
to,
track.
you don't choose to step back. You are thrown back, and you
Yeah.
have to look at everything, because what pain does is it magnifies what is really important, and it also burns away everything else that doesn't mean anything to you. And if you are awake and aware to that, you will see and you will understand, despite how much it hurts, right? Because remember, we're not diminishing the hurt. We still hurt. We're in pain, but it's our choice with how we move forward. And that's why I love Dr. Gabor Mate's definition of trauma as not what happens to us, but what happens inside of us as a result of what happens to us. So what happens next? You can influence. You can influence, and that's what that's what I'm really passionate about, reminding people, you know, and not to be afraid of the pain, because it is so normal. It's a normal reaction to an abnormal world or an abnormal situation.
Beautiful. I feel like it's a really nice full circle too, because the pain can spark new ideas. It peels away what we think we're meant to be doing. And in times of, you know, uncertainty and what else we said, stress and uncertainty, the pain is the gateway to art and creativity and expression.
And would you like another word for pain?
Yeah.
Problem. If you're in business, you're solving pain. That's what you're doing. So don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to ask, to look into it, to dig into it, to observe it, to get to know it, to be curious about it. Because on the other side of the pain is the solution, is the place where you want to be. On the other side of that is everything that you've dreamed of, right? So, you know, and it's not linear. It's not linear. You don't just arrive there and everything's fine again, because we're human and life continues on, right? So, but the good thing is the more times you do it, you get better at it, you get quicker at recognizing what's going on, and you become way more robust. You have so much more space to be able to handle it. You know, it's not you do it once and then it's the same every single time, but it is something where, you know, actually, now that I'm making this connection in my head now, the pain is what makes the cup bigger.
Yeah, because you can handle more, and
because you can handle more.
And you're not suppressing, you're actually feeling it.
Yeah, it's the pain that forges the cup and that makes the cup bigger, you know, because there's still going to be always stuff pouring in, and if you don't take advantage, or if you don't process those suppressed pain, you just have the same size cup with the same amount of pain and an overflowed cup.
Yeah, and you're constantly trying to, and it'll crack and, you know, and break, which just made me think too. It's like, I think of, as you were saying, that the cup expanding, it kind of had this image of like, you know, this kind of stone cup just, you know, growing in its structure and its strength. But then that also links me back to where we started around creativity. And I think of some of the best, most powerful, potent artists and creative thinkers and minds and just, you know, creative people in general that inspire me, and they have real, like, it's, they have a big, they can hold a lot in the container. And thinking of, even when I was writing my book, it was like, and I do this a lot with Joe Dispenza's meditation stuff as well, is like, the bigger your dreams and the goals and the creative influence you're going to have over the world, you have to be prepared to hold that energy. You don't get to take people on a creative journey or open their minds or make them think in the way that musicians and artists and speakers and writers and, people do expressing. You don't get that privilege if you can't hold it for yourself first and foremost. And then you will be the conduit for that, which is every artist's success, a dream of success and big influence and spreading their ideas and concepts around the world, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And that process of forging your cup, I think, is so personal. And there's so many things that you can do to do that, but it's so hinging upon your own past experience and your own future goals. So I think even just having an awareness of, if that's the level that you want to go to, investing that time and energy and expansion rather than contraction. And again, that tipping a little bit out and letting a little bit back in, having a conscious awareness on a day-to-day level of the activities and the people and the environments that do that for you, and then being strong enough and being determined enough to only choose the ones that are going to forge a bigger cup. I think that's the greatest challenge of our time, considering all the distractions and all the trauma and everything that's been going on.
Amazing advice, and thank you so much. It was a very inspired conversation. I love the links and the vulnerability and the wisdom, so thank you so much for sharing.
Oh, thanks. I feel like we could keep going, but I'm sure people's ears are burning right now, so
yeah, no, I would sit here for another hour, but I think that it's nice to send people away with that really clear message. And for me as well, like sitting with it and being like, we are so easily caught up in the story of who we think we're meant to be as humans, which is together and unemotional. And then, uncertainty and stress and scarcity experiences come from outside of us. And we respond to that in, I can be more perfect and let me, fit in the box, and I'm going to get rid of the creativity, and I'm not going to have autonomy of my life, and I'm not going to express myself because there's no room for that because it's an economic downturn, and actually going, well, no, they're the times where you need to go deeper into it. And that's actually where you get to go and feel it fully, rather than, doing I'm going to cut back on my $3 coffee a week, or, it's like actually go and do the work and go deep into that feeling and create from there and feel it and transmute it and feel like that makes you more authentic. And the more authentic you are, I think the more success people have, more connections, more, joy for life, more contentment.
And the easier life is when you're more yourself, because you don't have to pretend anymore. And I think we're in an age where we can see right through it. We can see right through the people who aren't who are just trying to make a quick buck, through the businesses that don't care about the environment or people. So people are very savvy, and that is going to demand a higher level of authenticity than we've ever had before, and that requires deep reflection and introspection and deliberate rumination to actually pull focus to the things that really matter to us, not to the world, but to us as people, because we're the ones creating the world, and we're the ones influencing the world around us. And that's really the most agency that we have, and where we can make the most difference.
Absolutely. And I think the more that we do this work and we give each other permission to do it, the more we can change the narrative.
Hell yeah.
Thank you so much for being here. How can people find you, get hold of you, work with you, be your best friend?
Yeah. Oh my God. I always love friends. I love people.
Mhm.
You can find me at Instagram at Marion Piper Creative. My website's also marionpipercreative.com. They're probably the two best places. And I've got
Mhm.
like workshops and coaching and all kinds of fun things to do. So
Mhm. You
have a
have an
look.
upcoming
Have a look.
workshop?
Yes, February 18 and February 19 online. I'm running the expression sessions, which are journaling workshops. I've got a pretty refined methodology for doing it. So if you're someone who's always struggled with it and can't seem to stick with it, I've got a very practical way of doing that. So if you want, there's an AM and a PM session. So
Mhm.
if you want to come along, it'd be great to spend some time with you. But yeah,
Mm. I
there's
love
always
that.
lots of things going on.
Be a student, listen, learn from Marion. I also just want to finish on that because I think with that journaling thing, and I don't know whether we've said it as clear, but I think in the conversation is like learning that journaling practice and trying to practice it as many times as you can throughout is the things that prepares you for when the feelings come. You know, it's like often we do the work, and I'm guilty of this. The shit hits the fan, and you're like, okay, what are all my skills? And you're like, journal this, that, and you just like start applying all of the remedies. But then, you know, having that realization of being like, oh, if I did the remedies every day or like at least a few times a week, then it wouldn't get this bad.
Yeah, and also too, having it down on paper means you can retrieve it, because
Mm,
how can you? We can't rely on memory alone.
mhm,
We do need archives of our past
mm,
selves that we can go back to and draw from, and that's why I love journaling, because it's I give myself the best advice because I know myself the best, and that's what
mm.
it's about, right? Be your own
And you're
best
the
friend.
kindest to yourself, I find. I find I'm really nice to myself
Oh,
in journaling.
especially on paper, like just in case anyone reads it.
I wrote a letter to myself on New Year's Eve a couple of years ago, and I was coming off the back of a breakup, and I was like really sad, and it was COVID, and I was like, someone amazing is on the way, and don't you settle for anything less, and like this real like, girl,
Pep
don't you
talk.
worry, you're gonna be so loved. And I completely forgot about it. Over a year later, I found it in like when I was unpacking all these boxes with the love of my life. Lizzie was standing next to me.
Boom.
And I was like, oh my God, look at this letter I wrote, and it's you.
See, words are
I love it.
powerful. Words are powerful.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you so much for being here. Happy Friday. Always love having you on the show, and we'll speak soon.
Sounds good.
Bye.
Bye.